Hey, everybody. I think I know almost every name I see on here, having talked here to this group for a few times. But if there are a few new folks here, nice to meet you, or at least meet your initials. I'll do a quick intro to me in just a second, but I'm going to talk today about Dataverse for Teams. This is a kind of a 101 version of it. I'm not super deep technically, but I like to kind of learn the tip of the iceberg across all these things. And Dataverse is close to me because my roots come more from the dynamic side, which is really kind of where the roots of Dataverse comes from too. So we're going to go through it. We're going to build a couple of apps in it. I'll use a template to build one. I'll build one from scratch. So you'll learn how to build Dataverse for Teams app with very low code, no code at all in some cases. And just know this is also a little bit about Canvas Power Apps. So if you've worked with Canvas Power Apps already, you've got a leg up. If you've worked with the Dataverse already, you've got a leg up. If you've worked with both of those before, you're going to find this very familiar, and you're just going to learn a couple of new things about how Microsoft kind of brings these together to create what's called Dataverse for Teams today. So thanks for having me. Let's dive in. Quick introduction. I'm going to introduce a co-virtual speaker today too. So my name is Geoff Able. I run a company called C5 Insight. We're celebrating our 20th birthday this year. In fact, we're all going to Charleston as a company at the end of this month. To kind of do our 20-year celebration together. And we're a Microsoft 365, Dynamics 365 Power Platform consulting organization. And we do a lot around just the process of digital customer and employee engagement aside from the technology. In fact, at the end of this, I'll mention a new adoption surveying tool that we're testing. And if you're interested in getting on board with doing some quick tests of that, I'd love to get your feedback on that. Co-speaking with me that you'll hear in a couple of these videos today is our SharePoint or Microsoft 365 practice director, Chris Ehart. So you'll hear his voice as well today. He's a coworker at C5 Insight. He's not with us physically today, but he's with us in spirit and he's with us in voice, as you'll see as we get into this. So here's our outline. I've presented the same content in about 3 hours. So obviously I've taken a little bit of slides out of it, and I'm going to kind of move through it pretty quickly to get it condensed into 1 hour. You're still going to get a lot of the most important things. I'm a big believer in just kind of saying, I'm going to help take you by the shoulders and point you in the direction of what this is. And then I'm going to show you where the resources are, where you can go even deeper, because that's how I like to start too. If I can just get pointed in the right direction, I can explore on my own quite a bit. So we're going to dive into the Dataverse, learn just a little bit about what it is. We're going to rapidly create a first app using a template. Then we're going to build an entire app from scratch. And then at the end, I'm going to close with some advanced concepts. So I'm a bottom-up kind of person when I present this. I like to get to work right away and give you some things you can do. And then at the end, I like to kind of bring the pieces of the puzzle together to paint the big picture. So into the Dataverse, that term's probably getting a little overused now because of the metaverse and the Marvel universe and stuff like that. I guess that's become popular. One quick thing just to disclose to you, these aren't official yet, maybe they will be, but Dataverse for Teams is a mouthful. So I use the acronym DV for Teams or DV4T. So if you see those in my slides or hear those uttered, you'll know that I'm really meaning Dataverse for Teams in those particular cases. So what I want to do to get us started is just kind of give you a little sample of what is the end product of a Dataverse for Teams app. So think of this as an art of the possible demo. This isn't a how to build it. This is just here's an app built in Dataverse for Teams. What does it look like? The other thing I'm going to do is mention to you that here's how I like to do these when I'm doing these hands-on walkthroughs. I've created these links down here. Whenever you see the orange fly out, there's a link. You can see how long the video is. I've pre-recorded the video for you. And when I make the PDF slides available to you guys afterwards, if you don't want to watch this whole video, but there's a little segment that you wanted to go back and see, you can just go through the PDF, find the slide with the link you like on it, click that link and play just that video. So that'll be there as a resource for you once we're done. Allie's using a Dataverse for Teams app she deployed for Contoso. This app is about ideas, sharing them, prioritizing them, and implementing them. The first thing you can see is that an app might use multiple tabs on a team. The Ideas app has 2 tabs. Manage Ideas, this is for the app administrator, and Ideas, this is the user experience for voting on ideas. Let's start by looking at Allie's experience with the Ideas tab. Now, Allie can see who's participating in generating and prioritizing ideas. She can also see the more popular or top-rated ideas from across Contoso. And she can see all the campaigns or categories that Contoso is capturing ideas for. Workplace safety is important to Allie, so she's going to navigate to this campaign. Hold on one second. For some reason, my video is not playing, even though my audio is. Now, she likes the pre-shift idea, so she's going to go ahead and upvote that idea. Allie also wants to submit a new idea, so she's going to go ahead and submit an idea here, and she'll just put in some basic information about it. And she's going to say this is going to have a pretty high impact and will require relatively little effort. She could add files if she wanted to, and she can also add an image here if she liked to. And she'll leave the comment on here to share it in the channel so everyone will see a post in the channel about it, and she'll submit her idea. Now let's take a look at manage ideas. Again, this is the administrator experience. It looks kind of familiar, but I get a few other options here. I have this gear link that lets me go and change some settings for the application in general. I also have the ability to add new campaigns or manage my campaigns. Let's create a new campaign. Allie's leadership told her they want to have some ideas on new products. So she will create a campaign just for that. Now notice that there's a number of questions here. Allie's happy with the questions that are here, but she can actually add new questions if she wants to as well. She'll add a picture, and she'll add that campaign. And just like that, a new campaign or category has been created for capturing ideas. So you can see a Dataverse for Teams app can be pretty sophisticated. This one has a user interface, an administrator interface, and even the ability to customize the app, such as by adding custom campaigns or questions. All right, so that's just a bit, again, art of the possible, a bit of vision around what kinds of functionality can you deliver in a Dataverse for Teams app. And we'll look at deploying that specific app in just a minute here. Quick overview of what Dataverse for Teams is. Some of this might get a little, if you've never worked with Dataverse or with Power Apps, this might be a little confusing for you. We'll cover it a lot as I go through all this, but understand that whenever you hear the term Dataverse from Microsoft, I've kind of come to just call that, it's just a database in the cloud, right? Just like a database, you can have multiple databases. So if you're working with Microsoft 365 and you say, I need to have two different databases for two different apps, that would actually be two different Dataverses. Inside of those Dataverses are multiple tables and also all the other things that you might work with within a database, such as the user interface, and all of those are managed within there as well. It's easy to create things in those. So, you can easily create new tables. You can add columns to them. You'll see the experience is kind of like building a Microsoft list almost. You can build applications within it. It supports relational data. So if you're a Microsoft list user and you're thinking, there's something I want to do, but lists just aren't quite powerful enough for me to do it. Maybe it's a relational linkages between multiple lists. Maybe it's something you need to do unique in the user interface. Maybe it's security standards that lists don't really support very well out of the box. Dataverse for Teams is kind of a next step up from a Microsoft list to do a somewhat more sophisticated application. And when you're building anything in Dataverse for Teams, you're actually building a Power App. You're building, in fact, a Canvas Power App for it. In fact, although the Microsoft calls it Dataverse for Teams, if you go to the applications area of Teams, the far left menu, and you go to the applications and you add an application from the store, you're going to search for Power Apps. You're not going to search for Dataverse for Teams, and it's going to be called Power Apps. But when you add that app and when you create an application in it, it's creating a database in Dataverse for Teams for managing the data behind the scenes. So really, it's Dataverse plus Canvas apps when you're working with Dataverse for Teams. Now, you also have the ability to build Power Automates and Power Virtual Agents related to that same Dataverse that you've just built. Today, I'm not going to talk about those much. I'm mostly going to focus just on Dataverse for Teams and Power Apps that you build inside of there. But understand, if you've built either of those things before, those things are available to you too, and I'll come back and talk just a tad bit about those at the end of today's session. And by the way, if you guys have any questions or comments while we're going, please feel free to just put them in chat. I love to see that coming in, even if I, as the speaker, can't stop to answer them. There's a lot of knowledgeable people on here today, so you might find that there's some engagement from others when they answer them, and to whatever extent they're already in there at the end of the session, I'll pause and time permitting, I'll answer them then. Okay, so let's create our first app. So the first thing we need to do is we need to set up Dataverse for Teams to use it the first time. Pretty simple to do. Let's look at this 1-minute video.
The easiest way to provision Dataverse for Teams is to create an app within Teams itself. First, create the team in which you want to provision Dataverse for Teams. Here we have our Contoso marketing team. Then from the left panel, use the ellipsis to search for and select Power Apps. Once you have it selected, click Add. At this point, you have enabled Dataverse for Teams. You are presented with a page that allows you to start an app from scratch or create an app from a template. There are also quite a few learning resources at the bottom of the page that can be very helpful as you're learning to build in this new environment.
All right, simple enough. So you just basically go in and say, put Power Apps inside of my applications available to do something with inside of Teams. We haven't deployed anything yet. It's just a few clicks away from there to do that. So now let's take a look at that. Let's look at a 4-minute video and see how to create that sample app, the ideas one that I walked through from an end user standpoint. Let's look how to set that up as an administrator.
In this scenario, we're going to create a Power App from an existing template. Our company-wide team, Contoso, is a place where we come together to have conversations and share information. Adele is a sales manager who thinks it would be great to introduce an ideas channel and an app to easily review, manage, and even vote on different ideas from other colleagues as a way to help increase team engagement. Adele creates her ideas channel in the Contoso team.
Sorry, for some reason, sometimes these videos don't play even though the audio is working.
Then she navigates to Power Apps using the ellipsis on the left.
There we go.
She finds the perfect template for her ideas channel. She selects it and then clicks Add to a Team. She searches for Contoso and selects the Ideas channel. Then she clicks Set up a tab. When prompted, she chooses to post to the channel about the tab that will be created. Adele then clicks Save. The setup takes a few minutes to provision the app and necessary data structures. Once complete, Adele is presented with a permissions prompt asking to use her credentials to interact with parts of Microsoft 365. Adele clicks Allow. Then, Adele is presented with choices for where the team and channel are located to which messages are posted by the app. Adele selects the Contoso team and the Ideas channel. She clicks Let's Go. Adele turns off the next prompt, since she is already aware she is spinning up a Power App that can be customized if necessary. And now, her app is ready. There are 2 tabs, one to manage campaigns that help us organize our ideas, and then the primary ideas app that everyone has access to. Again, Adele is presented with a prompt indicating that she needs to allow certain permissions. She clicks allow. These apps are pre-populated with data to help see how the app is supposed to work. The app has a clean layout with simple navigation and even search capabilities if our campaigns list becomes extensive. Adele is now able to introduce the Ideas app at the next quarterly town hall.
All right. So that was just deploying a template app, obviously no code at all, just kind of knowing where to go and how to pick out a template app to say deploy it. Strategically, if you're going to do that, you either want to have a sandbox team set up so you can play around with it, or you need to know where your production team is going to be and be comfortable that that app is going to make sense inside of that particular team. One thing you may have noticed when Chris set that up is it took a little while, right? We sped through that part of the video a little bit, but the first time you deploy a Power App, either deploy or develop a Power App for a team, a Dataverse app for a team, behind the scenes, Microsoft 365 is literally creating a Dataverse just for that team. So when you first create one for a team, a couple of minutes while it does all the work it needs to do to kind of put all the architectural pieces in place in order for you to build an application on top of that. Go back to create another one for that team, and it goes right through it because it's already built that on the back end. Now, for those 8 different apps that you see there are 3 that I actually find kind of interesting, but they don't install following the same path. These actually live on the GitHub, and you have to go to GitHub to get them, download them, and install them. So I'm not going to play this video in the interest of time, but here's the process for getting them from GitHub. And there's a video there you can come back to if you're interested in those apps in order to have those available. I put it here because I think that these are 3 of the most interesting apps out there available as templates right now. And me as sort of the, the citizen developer, the low code person or something like that, when I first looked at GitHub for these, I thought, this is really busy and kind of overwhelming. And I'm afraid I might do something wrong. So I kind of shied away. But once I went through and got someone to show me, it's actually super simple to retrieve these and install them in your production environment. And the nice thing about all these template apps are they're great learning tools as well. So you can install the template, but you have full administrative access to edit that template however you want to. So if you look at something like the Ideas one that we just walked through and said, well, that's nice, but it's not quite a perfect fit for what we want to do. Well, that's okay. If it's even close, you can install it and do some of your own tweaking of it however you like to make it work just the way your team works. So use those as either as a framework for apps that you're going to develop or as a learning tool or both. Okay, so now let's dive in. You've kind of seen the basics of how to do a template and what's possible with these applications. Now let's build a simple application from scratch by ourselves. So our scenario is this. We're going to build an inventory management application. I run into that as a pretty common gap for a lot of our clients. Yes, there are very expensive, very well built out inventory management apps, or inventory management is provided as part of some apps sometimes, but for smaller companies or sometimes even just divisions of very large companies that don't have access to all that, building a custom app is all that they need. They don't need that much sophistication. Now, when you think about all the ways you can manage inventory or the types of inventory you can manage, you'd probably build the app pretty differently depending on what kind of material or what kind of inventory it is. So what I focused on was what I call raw materials inventory, which is, hey, we're a manufacturer, we're making something, and we need to inventory raw materials that we use to make the something that we make so that we know we can fulfill the custom orders or whatever the production quantities are we want because we have enough inventory on hand in order to produce those items. But you can see there's other ones here too, right? It can be a corporate asset, like I just need to track everybody's computers. So if we have employee turnover, we know to ask for it back and that kind of thing. Same principles apply. I was just trying to look for something that kind of gave me a lot of different things to learn as we went through the scenario. So I chose this one. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create a team that this is going to go into. Probably pretty straightforward for all of you, but I'm going to play the short video just in case. First, Allie is going to create a team and a channel for her app. So let's go down and create a team. We'll create from scratch. It's going to be a private team, and we will name it Supply Chain. Let's give it a description and create. While we're here, let's add some initial members to it. Allie's going to add William Contoso, Alan Steiner, and we're also going to add manufacturing ops to this team. Okay, let's close that. Now for the team, let's go ahead and make a couple of configuration changes. First of all, let's create a picture for the team. And we'll save that. Now let's add a channel for our app as well. Allie's going to create a channel called Inventory, and she'll give that a description too. Okay, our team is all set up and ready for us to create our Dataverse app. All right, pretty simple. Again, probably all of you have done that a lot of times. A couple things to point out just in general. Remember, when you're creating the team or deciding which team an app is going to live on, create it, follow some strategic thinking with that, do some planning, because Power Apps for Teams or Dataverse for Teams apps don't migrate to other teams very easily. Can it be done? Sure. But it's not like a production versus development environment where you're going to develop it in one team and then just kind of copy it over to another team. You really want to have it on the team you want it to live on when you go first create it. I always think you should create metadata. So metadata is just fill in those description fields so that people can find it via search easier. They can have all the hints they need to know why was this created, what function is it supposed to serve. Always use a picture. Human beings, we just respond better to visual than just to two-letter abbreviations for the name of an application or the name of a team. And if you didn't notice, I actually added a team to this team. So kind of a cool thing not everybody knows about, but when I go define a team and the members of a team, I can go type in a team name and it will grab everybody in that team that's not already a member of this team, and it will make them a member of this team as well. That is not dynamic, however. So when I did manufacturing ops, it went out there one time only, said who's a member of manufacturing ops now, brought them into this particular team. Someone adds or removes someone from manufacturing ops, that is not going to impact who is a member of this new team that I just created. The good news is you can actually do that pretty easily with a Power Automate now too. So if you want to keep membership of one team in sync with another team, you can do that without too much work. Another best practice, and you're going to see us do this together, but think about data design before you get right in and do something, right? Even if you're building something in Microsoft Lists, it's good to think about what data do I want to capture? How do I need to organize it? What's the structure? That kind of thing. And when you name your tables, name them for the type of records you're going to contain, right? Such as, one thing I knew in our data design was I'm tracking inventory and I'm tracking what's in my inventory. It's a list of items. So I'm going to name my table items. And I put some fields in there. Realistically, you probably have more fields in this in your final app, but I'm keeping it simple to start with. You can also see I have a field here called supplier. Now that supplier is actually going to be a relational field. So I can now say, rather than on every record, type in the supplier name and their email address and their URL and phone number or something like that, I can just type in a supplier name and it will pull in that supplier's information directly from that related supplier table. And again, Dataverse for Teams, the Dataverse supports very rich relational structures. You can kind of do this with Microsoft Lists as well, but you get a lot more richness with and performance with relational databases in Dataverse for Teams than you get in Microsoft Lists. So here's our simple data design that we're going to be working with today. So first thing we want to do is we just want to create the blank application. Not going to add anything to it. We're just going to follow a few basic steps to say, let's get started with this app. Let's get started creating our Dataverse app. So in Microsoft Teams, I'm going to click on the ellipses here if I don't see Power Apps in the side menu already. And I'm going to click the Power Apps app. And once it's done loading, I'm going to choose New App from the list of recent apps. the first thing we have to do is choose the team that the app will be in. We created the team supply chain for this app, so that's what we're going to choose. And create. Now note the message at the top. This is the first app for this team, so it's going to need some setup time. And I'm going to advance through this process quickly. When it's done setting up, you're asked to name your app. We're going to name our app Inventory Management and click Save. And after a few moments, we're on the canvas with some options to start building our app. All right, that was super quick. Again, all we've done is just said, we're going to get started, create a Dataverse for me, give me a blank canvas so I can start building. So here, in my view, is the maker process, right? We move through some of these things very quickly. Some of them we go through iteratively, but what we do is we start with data. We create a table that's going to hold data, sort of like if we were creating a Microsoft list. We're going to add columns to that data, to that table, and we're going to put some test data in there, because when you're building any kind of Power App, Canvas Power App, you can actually see your data as you're building. So it's nice to have a little bit of data, dummy or real, in there to work with. Then we'll generate our app. At some point, we'll go back in and modify our app. And finally, we'll publish our app to teams once we're ready to put it into production. And we might loop back through steps 4 through 6 again and again as our app matures over time. So let's go create our first table. We're going to create using data. Here we are on the canvas for a new app, and we want to start creating our app with data. So let's click that link. And the first thing we're going to do is create a new table for our data. We're going to name our table item, because we tend to name a table for whatever one record in it is. Now, I like to always check the advanced settings when I'm working with something, especially the first time. And you notice it intelligently said, here's the plural form of the thing you're creating in this table. That looks good. Let's keep going. Now that our table is in edit format, let's start by renaming our first column. So I'm going to click on the column, and I'm going to click edit the column. And I'm just going to change this column from name to item name and click save. Next, let's add some more columns. We'll add a column. We're going to name this column item number. This is actually going to be a auto number field. And we want to look at the advanced settings for this one. We want a string prefix for our number. Our string prefix is going to be ITM dash. We want to have 5 digits as the minimum. And we're going to make our seed value 1. And notice the preview here, it gives me 4 leading zeros because I selected 5 minimum digits. So our first item will be ITM dash quadruple 01. And then a maximum of 100, more than enough for all the items we may ever need. But even within this format, before we start adding digits, we can get 100,000 different items in there. Great, let's create that field. Okay, now let's add a description field so we can have a bit more of a detailed description than in the item name field. We're going to leave this as a text field, but we're going to make it up to 1,000 characters long. Now let's add the quantity field. This is going to be a number field. Now I'm using number because I'm assuming we're going to have integers. If you have partial quantities like a half of a bag or a half of a pallet, you might actually want to use a different field type. This is fine for my purposes, but I am going to make the minimum value 0. We can't have a negative number of items on hand. We'll create that. And lastly, let's add the category field. This is going to be a choice field, and I'll quickly add a bunch of choices to this. And we will create that column. Okay, our initial table design is finished. I'm going to add some sample data to this table quickly for purposes of our training. When I'm done, I'll hit close. And the app will do some work to set itself up according to that first table of data that I've created. All right, so if you remember the app lifecycle that I just talked about in the last slide, we just worked through the first 3 out of 6 steps. This is an app that's almost ready to go. In fact, you could publish it to teams right now, and people could use it as is. It may not have all the features and functions in it I want, but just by designing the data, we can basically have it auto-generate something that's the basis for a fairly robust application. A couple things you might have noticed as I was in there doing that. First of all, the creation experience is kind of similar to lists. Once I know how to go in and create the app and click start with data, I add columns almost like I'm building a list, or when you work with the document library, it's the same kind of way of working with it. So pretty simple, pretty familiar experience. Now, you might have also noticed, if you were really looking and thinking carefully, when I created the description column, I did not get to pick multi-line text like I would in a Microsoft list. I could make it really big. I had a lot of characters in there. I think it's 1,000 or 5,000 characters or something like that. But I couldn't pick multi-line text, because when you're building a Microsoft list, it's trying to make the process so simple that by the field type you select, it's making decisions about the user interface as well. Whereas once you go to Dataverse and Canvas Power Apps, more of the power around the user experience gets done while you're designing the experience. So we'll look at that particular use case of updating the description field to make it multi-line and what that looks like in just a couple of minutes. But otherwise, super simple process. No code at all. You've got a functional application. We're just one click short of publishing it to teams, which we'll learn about in a minute. Now, one thing I would say is, if you're a starter, and even if you're more advanced, oftentimes, you probably want to start with data, because starting with data means Power Apps, Dataverse for Teams, is going to take the data and say, based on the data you defined, I'm going to define the user interface for you. You can change it, but I'm going to give you a skeleton you can get started with and put something on top of. To me, that's a lot easier than starting from a layout and saying, okay, I'm going to connect to data and now build my layout custom based on the data. Once you get advanced, that may or may not make sense, but to me, I like starting with data first. How do you import data into Dataverse? Good question. Let me come back to that at the end. I'll try to monitor those and answer them. I'm not going to go through the slide in detail, but if you're in there thinking about what your data design looks like, here's a reference slide for you to think about. Here are the different data types available to you during the maker experience in Dataverse for Teams. There's actually some additional data types I'll talk about near the end of this, and I'll talk about how to get in to define those data types a little further on in the application. Now, when you choose data, you can also choose other data sources. This is a Canvas Power App, so you can connect to data that lives in other places. Notice at the top it says current environment. So that's the Dataverse behind this particular team. And if you look at it, when it first gets created, you'll see a lot of tables in there. When that Dataverse gets created, a lot of tables get added to it that are sort of housekeeping and administrative tables. So they're not generally tables you will access as a maker. They're more tables that the application itself uses to self-manage itself, right? Or if you built a bot or a Power Virtual Agent using this Dataverse, it has its own set of administrative tables that it uses. So any tables in current environment are ones that you created, probably a few, or ones that were already in there. Quite a few. Next, you have AI models. So AI models can create data dynamically. I haven't experimented with those much inside of Dataverse for Teams, but they're in there as well. And you can connect to external data sources. So if you've got some data already living in a Microsoft list, for example, and you want to continue to use that data directly in that list without having to create it in Dataverse for Teams, you can choose to do that, or an Excel spreadsheet or SQL or whatever it is. So it's a Canvas Power App, and you can connect to multiple data sources if you want to. If your intention is to create a Canvas Power App without any Dataverse for Teams data in it, this is the wrong approach to take. You want to go create a standard Canvas Power App in that case, connect to your data sources with that, and then you can just embed that within Teams without having to spin up a Dataverse as well. Okay, so Dataverse generated our app. Now let's go check our work real quick and say, how does this work? How well does this application do what it needs to do? Are there any gaps I need to fill in? Let's take a minute to look at that. Because I started building this app with data, Dataverse for Teams built my first form for me. Let's take a quick guided tour to see how it works. We'll start up here. We're going to click the preview button. And as you can see, I can now interact with my app. I can navigate through my different records on the left. As I do so, the detailed information about that record updates over here on the right. I can update a record if I want to by clicking the pencil and change any values I'd like. And when I'm done, I can save by clicking the checkbox. Adding a new record, pretty much the same thing. Click new record over here on the left. A new blank record is created, and I can just fill it in. And to save it again, I click the checkbox. And lastly, I can delete a record just by navigating to it and clicking the garbage can. I'm going to cancel because I want to keep all of my sample data. So with very little work, I have a functional application. Let's click X to exit the preview mode. Dataverse for Teams or Power Apps for Teams tries to give me some helpful guidance here. I'm going to shut that off for the rest of today's session. Now, if I was happy with this app, I could just click Publish to Teams to make it available to my users. We're not going to do that just yet, though. Okay, so pretty simple. You kind of saw the app fully functioning now once we essentially hit the play button. Is it in production yet? No, you're still designing it and it's not available to users. You haven't published it to teams, but you can interact with it and see exactly how it works that way. So now before we publish it for our users, let's make a few tweaks to the app. I want to modify the form. If you looked at it closely, you saw kind of on one side of the pane is a form, on the other side is a list. Let's start by modifying the form a little bit to make that more the experience we want the users to have. Let's make a few changes to our app. We're in the Power App Studio, and there are 3 panes here. On the left pane, we want to make sure we're in the tree view. So click on this icon over here. It looks like 3 stacked pieces of paper. The middle pane is our canvas. That's where we see the user application. And the right pane gives us the options for whatever we've clicked on in the middle pane. Notice it changes based on what I've clicked on. I'm going to click on this form area now. Okay, so on this form, one of the first things I want to do is I want to make some changes to the fields the user sees. We're going to click the Edit Fields button. We can add, remove, or rearrange fields using this. And let's move our fields into a somewhat new order. I like item number to be first, so I'm going to drag that up, then name, then let's put category next. Then quantity available. And finally, we'll leave the description field for last. But while we're on it, let's actually expand this and change it to a multi-line text data entry. Okay, great. I'm happy with those changes. I'm going to close that panel. Now, further down here in this pane, I have other options for my form. I can change some of how this works. I can turn off snap to columns. That allows me to drag and drop things to very precise areas. I can change the number of columns. Notice when I reoriented my columns, it switched to a single column. If I want to move that around to different formats, I can do that. There's a 2 column. There's a 3 column. I could even change this to horizontal format if I wanted to. No, I like the vertical format, and 2 columns suits my needs for this application. Now let's make a change to our description field. If I come over here and click on this specific component, notice that I'm on the card, which contains this description label, as well as the field. I want to make changes directly to the field, so I'm going to click on that again. And now we can make changes to the field using the right-hand panel. Our mode is multi-line, which I like, but let's turn on spell check for this field. And you may remember we gave this a lot of characters for data entry, but I can't see many lines here. So let's take this height of 48. Let's change it to 100 to allow a little more space for data entry. And while we're in here, I'm going to make one other change. Let's click on the item number field. Again, click once for the card, a second time for the field itself. And I'm going to turn off the accept focus option. That way you can never tab into that field. Since it's not something the user can modify, I like that kind of behavior. Okay, we're done editing the form itself. Now, if we want to save our changes in progress, just click the Save button. All right, so that was a basic form edit, and we'll talk about all the parts of the screen in just a second here, but I wanted to go into the demo in particular first. Now let's look at the list, right? The list is that navigable list of items that when I click one, it's going to open up the form. And I'm going to get into a little bit of light coding in this case. I've tried to be no code so far, but I wanted to show you a simple way to do a little bit of coding to create a slightly different experience. So keep your eyes open for that in the video. Now let's make a change to our gallery. This is the list of records on the left side of the app. As before, click on an empty area to edit the control we want to change. Now in the right pane or properties pane, let's go over to edit the fields. We want to quickly see quantities without having to click on records. So let's change subtitle 1 from item number to quantity available. And we'll close the data panel. Now, users may not intuitively know what that number means, so let's explain it for them a little bit. Notice at the top, in the properties list, it says the text, meaning the text for this field, equals a formula. The formula is this item dot quantity available. This item means the current record that the user has selected or that's being displayed. And quantity available is the name of the field. You may remember we gave it that name when we created the table, and we also changed that field to that value just a few moments ago. Let's add a prefix to that so that the user can see it here. So in front of this area, I'm going to enter this, quote, quantity equals, end quote, ampersand. If you've ever written a formula in Excel, this may feel kind of familiar to you. The quotes mean display this exact text, and the ampersand means then follow it up with this formula or concatenate this text with the formula that was already there. Join those two things together. Okay, we've completed the basic design for our first screen, including the gallery on the left and the form on the right. Let's save our work before we do anything else. All right, so pretty simple stuff that we went through there. Again, you saw a little bit of light coding there, and that is the Power App world. It supports a lot of no code, it supports a lot of low code, and yes, it supports pro code too if you want to do even more with it. Again, we're going to come back and dissect. In fact, I think on this next screen we start. Yeah. So let's walk through this whole maker experience real quick for those of you who are not familiar with Power Apps, Canvas Power Apps. And if you are, most of this will be familiar, maybe a couple of small new things here for you. But what you see on the screen when you go to create an app for Dataverse for Teams is what's called the Power Apps Studio, right? And it's almost the same as if I just went into Power Apps and decided to create a new Power App from there, with just a couple of tweaks that are making it a little bit different. The real magic, by the way, is happening behind the scenes because it's connecting you to that Dataverse for Teams database automatically for you. So the very first part of it is you have the build hub, the navigation area, right? The navigation is simply those, several things right across the top of the screen that lets you move around the application a little bit. When you're looking at this main interface, you're in the build area, right? That's where all that stuff is going on. When you go back home, you're going back into that first pane. If I went to the Power Apps app within Teams, I'd kind of be back in that user interface. And the back button takes me back to whatever I was on before, which may also be that same place in Teams. Then on the far left side, we have the app authoring menu, right? That's that thin little panel, and it's almost its own menu. As I change items within this panel, it changes what I see over here in this next panel. You'll probably spend most of your time on the tree view. You might also spend some time over here adding elements to the canvas, to the user experience. But you can also go down here to bring in new tables, new information, or even create new tables. And then this is for inserting media into the user experience. And as I said, this next panel over is called the App Authoring Options. It changes based on what you did with the previous menu. But this is where you do a lot of interaction. And one of the things you can see over here is this tree view is very hierarchical. I think I have a slide on the hierarchy. What I find is almost everything in Microsoft 365, SharePoint, Teams, Power Apps also actually works with a hierarchy. And if you understand the hierarchy, you learn to understand a lot about how it works. It takes away a lot of the mystery and makes it a lot simpler for you. So we'll come back and talk about how this hierarchy works in just a moment. And then in the middle is what is the most visible element, right? This is the user experience. This is what's called the canvas. And the canvas is made up of generally whatever you want to stick on it, multiple different things, and even multiple different screens. So when I'm designing, I can only see one screen at a time, but we can navigate the tree to get to different screens. And on the far right is the properties pane. That is updated whenever I select something different on the canvas. So it's basically saying, here are the properties about this item. You notice when I click on a form, it gives me one thing. This is saying, here's my form. It's called edit form. But if I clicked on an item within that form, it would give me something else. And if I click again on that item, it would actually give me the field on that. So it's changing to say, here are the things you as a maker can do with this item you're currently pointed to on the canvas. And up here, similarly, actually, this is also properties for the currently selected item, but this is where you start to get into the light coding, the low code environment if you need to modify those. So you can see for the current thing that I've selected down here, it's saying, okay, well, the current property that you're looking at is data source, and that data source is items. Remember, I named my table items. I could actually go in here and change the data source manually if I wanted to do that. Or if I click the drop down here, I'd see a full list of properties, and I could go select those different properties to see what kind of settings changes I can make to each one of them. So you start to see, you're seeing just the tip of the iceberg, right? There's so much we can do with this that we won't have time to cover today, but at least you'll know how to navigate your way around. And here's our tree view, right? Again, the tree view is the hierarchical list of everything in your application. And at the moment, we're on the edit form part of the tree view. Where is the edit form located? Well, it's located inside the right container. So this screen has a left container and a right container. And this edit form is located inside of that container. Well, where's that container located? That's located on this screen called Screen 1. Now, this application only has one screen in it for now. But if I added multiple screens to it, I would only be able to see one in the canvas at a time. But I could come over here to the tree view, and I could click on the different screens within the tree view to bring that screen up to the maker level where I can do some design changes on it. And here's the basic hierarchy when you're looking at the tree view. So generally at the top, you have screens, right? Those are the main elements that the user encounters. Some applications, every application has at least one. Some applications have many. Inside of a screen, you usually have containers. So containers might hold things like a list or a form or something else. Inside of those containers are the things. Those are the forms, the gallery, which is another name for the list. And then even within those, you might have components. Those are the actual labels and fields and images and buttons and things like that that get served up at that level. So 4 levels of the hierarchy. There can be more, and some of those are optional depending on what you're trying to do. But that's the basic hierarchy that helped me to get my head around. And if we really want to drill into that hierarchy a little bit, here is our ideas application that we looked at earlier. This application has 10 screens. I can only see about 4 of them in the tree view at the moment. I'd have to scroll to see more. Within those, I'm actually on the campaign summary screen. Within the campaign summary screen, I'm on the container called campaign summary. There's multiple containers on that screen. Within that container, I'm in the gallery called the campaign summary gallery. Now, if you remember, that gallery runs horizontally, unlike our other application we've been building that runs vertically. You can also see that gallery has items in it like images and stuff like that. So I have a lot of design flexibility with what I put in there. And by the way, within that particular gallery, I'm on this label, which is the campaign summary _ idea count label. So I'm that deep in the hierarchy, and I can see exactly where I am if I need to move around. Sometimes if you're not sure where something is in the user interface, you don't know how to go click it, you go navigate the tree view, you can find exactly what you're looking for, and you can even search that tree view to find what you're looking for. Okay, so we have added one table to our application so far. Let's look at adding one more table. I think we're doing okay on time. I know we're coming up near the end. I might race through a few following slides, but this is a pretty important one. I'm adding this table by creating a whole new app. I'll talk about another way you can do it in a minute. This is just the easiest to me. Each table you want to manage in the Dataverse for Teams can really be thought of as a separate app. So let's go back to the home page for Power Apps, and we're going to create another app, this one for suppliers. This will still be a part of our supply chain team. Notice this pops up much more quickly because the Dataverse has already been created for this team. We're going to name this app Supplier List. Just like before, we are going to start with data, so it will save us the work of creating our own form. So we're going to create a new table. We're going to name our new table Supplier. And we'll change the name field to Supplier Name. And we're going to add several other fields to this list. Before we save it, let's throw some sample data into our list. And let's close our table designer. As before, Dataverse for Teams is going to automatically create an initial screen for us, including a browse gallery to the left and data entry form on the right. This time, we're not going to make any changes to this app. Let's just save it. Now we're going to go back to the home page for Power Apps. We're going to reopen our inventory management app. And we want to modify the database with a column that connects these items to suppliers. So we're going to start by going to the far left. We're going to click the data icon. Here's our items table. Let's click the ellipsis on it. Let's edit the data. And let's add a new column name here. We'll name it Supplier. And the type in this case is going to be a lookup field. Lookup means we're going to look up the value in another table. The related table is going to be Supplier. And now we click Create. Notice if I click these fields or double click these fields, I get a lookup list of all the suppliers I just created. Let's close the data designer. Now we need to add supplier name to our item form. We're going to click on the blank area of the form. And you may remember we would now click Edit Fields. We're going to add a field. Here are all the fields in our table. And here's our supplier field. Let's add that. There it is as the last field on the form. We can move it if we want to. We'll leave it alone for now. Close the Edit Fields panel and save our app. So now we've created the supplier table. We've created the form for the supplier table, and we've added a link to the item form that looks up an item from the supplier table. All right. So I created that other table by creating an entirely new app, right? Just like I created my first table, I created the other one. There's some pros and cons to using that approach. One of the pros is it's easiest, no code required at all. It also gives the user interface a tab in Teams for each table. You'll see when I save these. So that can be helpful, right? You might say, well, I want on one channel to be about suppliers, but I want another channel to be about inventory. Well, in that case, you can actually put those tabs on two different channels and allow two different groups of people to manage those things. On the other hand, you might want more of a consolidated user experience where they're just inside of one app and they can navigate between those as different screens. To do that, all you would do is just go within the one app, go down to the databases, add a new table, generate the table, let the table generate another screen just like you did before. And then all you have to do is somehow in the user interface, give the user a way to navigate between those two screens, probably a button. Okay. So I'm not going to play this video in the interest of time. It's a very simple one, but essentially to publish these, I just opened up each one of those applications separately. And you remember in the upper right corner of the application builder of the maker experience, there's a Publish to Teams button. I literally just click that. It asks me a couple of questions. It asks which channel I want to put it on, and it puts the tab up there for me automatically. Really, really easy to do, and you can go watch a video later to do that if you want to. Similarly, I'm going to skip this video, but once your application is published, you can make changes to it just the way you saw me create it in the first place. So you can go back into the builder experience, go over to Power Apps on the far left side, open up that application, start making changes. You can save your changes while it's in production without publishing them to production. So if you're adding fields and moving things around and all that, you can save it, you can hit play, you can play with it. And then once you're ready for your end users to have it, you just hit Publish to Teams again. Off it goes to Teams to do that again. And you can watch that video to see how that experience works, but it's pretty much what you've already learned. So there it is. You've built a pretty sophisticated multiple table application in those 6 relatively easy steps with very, very little code. There's a lot more you can do with it. A quick summary of some of this. First of all, when you build your apps, they are mobile ready. So when you add an app to a channel, this is not the same app. It's one I spun up really quickly just to manage a list of contacts. And you can see here I am in the Teams desktop experience, but here I am in the Teams mobile experience. When I went to this tab on this channel, it opened up the app. And notice that it nicely sized it for me so that instead of trying to cram all of this into one screen, it says I'm going to give you the gallery here. When you click on something in the gallery, I'm going to give you the form experience over here. So it takes care of a lot of that work for you. One other concept to know about. When you create a first Dataverse app for a team, you remember it creates a Dataverse. That takes some time. It takes it a few minutes. If I go create another app for that team, such as the supplier app in this case, it was much more rapid because the Dataverse was already there. There's a good thing and a bad thing about that. In this particular case, it was good because I wanted those two tables to interact with each other relationally. So it really was kind of one app, if you will, behind the scenes. But what if I really wanted two completely different applications, two completely different sets of databases? I can't do that with Dataverse for Teams, not on the same team, right? Each team does get its own Dataverse. So I can go to a different team, create a new app. It's going to create a whole new database, a whole new Dataverse for Teams set of tables for that particular team, but I can't have two Dataverses on one team. Not yet, anyway. There are other build components here. So if you look, if you look more closely at this, if you go into this, you can see some of the more advanced options. And that's by going into the build experience within Power Apps for Teams. I hit the build tab, and I can see some of these other things I can build: chatbots, cloud flows, environment variables, data flows, which is in preview now. Someone asked about importing data. That is one way to import data. So data flows allows you to do some of that on an automated basis. You can also click on edit in Excel, and that allows you to do some data import. And of course, you got Power Automate if you want to do that, if you've got some very specific data import needs and you need to customize it with Power Automate. Inside that build experience also, you can go directly to your tables. And when you do that, you have some additional settings you can make at the data level for those tables, such as is a field optional or required, and there's some different data types available to you. The security model is on each table that you create, not on the app, but on each table that you create. But it's a very simple security model. It's based on teams. So it looks at your team and says, here are the owners of the teams. What can owners do? Well, owners actually by default can do everything. So if you have an owner of a team, they have permission to kill. They can go into that Power App, that Canvas Dataverse for Teams Power App, and edit it, change it, delete it, do whatever they want to do. Be aware of that. You might want to educate people, or you might want to take away ownership permissions for some owners. Then your members and your guests have other permissions as well. And that is on a table by table basis. You can, by going to the Power Apps administrative interface, upgrade your Dataverse for Teams to Dataverse. That's a little confusing. At least it was to me when I first looked at it. I thought, well, maybe that's a bug because it already is a Dataverse, right? Well, Dataverse for Teams is a junior version of the full Dataverse. The full Dataverse gives you a lot of other capabilities. That little matrix down there on the bottom gives you an example of the limitations of Dataverse for Teams versus Dataverse. All right. So I saw another question come up here. We've got a minute or so. So let's see. Can you validate data in tables? For example, make sure that someone doesn't type an invalid state code or an email that doesn't match. Yes, you can, but you would actually do that in the low code environment, right? So it's unlike Microsoft Lists that tries to put a lot of that right into the maker experience when you're defining the field types. In Dataverse for Teams, within the Power App, you would want to build the validation into the Power App itself. So that's generally how you would do that. Great question. It's possible to do it, but it does get into the low code type of scenario where you want to work on some of those things. A few last comments here, and then I'll open it up for any other questions too. If you want to get in touch with me, feel free. By the way, if you like, I don't know if you know the Powered by Luck. If you've ever heard me talk before, you might have heard me talk about that. Glad to make a button or a sticker available to you if you want me to just drop that in the mail. I mentioned this up front, but we are rolling out a new app called Adair. And it's a survey that predicts user adoption and provides specific action items on how to manage your cultural strengths and weaknesses to drive better adoption. If you're interested in that, we might even do sort of a free or sample data or something like that We're just getting it off the ground, and we'd love to have a few people who say, I'd love to engage our organization in that. We're not looking to make money on it so much as to prove it out as a concept. So you're a great audience for that because we built it around Microsoft 365 and Dynamics 365. And of course, this is what we do. So if you're looking for a partner to help you through any part of Microsoft 365, Dynamics, or Power Platform, I'd be more than happy to, of course, engage with you in that as well. But at this point, what I'd like to do is just unmute mics, ask if there are any questions. I'll turn my screen off.